Good morning. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. Hope you guys are all having a good morning. At least it's Friday, right? At least it's Friday. I haven't been here in a couple days. I hope I have all my stuff in order. I think everything's good. It was tough getting going this morning after I'm not here for a couple days. Everything's kind of out of whack, and but good to be back. Hopefully, you guys are having a good week. I know the weather's a little bit crazy. I don't know about you guys, but yesterday in my area, we had quite a few severe storms. There was a tornado, gosh, 9 miles south of me. It's like I'm so tired of tornadoes. I don't know how many of you remember, but on March 14th of 2025, we had a really bad tornado that came through, and several tornadoes actually that hit throughout Missouri and Illinois, and I had one that came. It landed I somewhere back in the back here and came up through the side. Just I mean I don't know five. I think I read it was like 400 yards from the house here, and it did a lot of damage. And so I was a little nervous about storms yesterday, but in my area, not too bad, not too bad, not as bad as but it's cold today. I have a jacket on. I was up here getting ready, and I'm like, man, I better go find a jacket. Good morning, Joe. Hope you're doing well. Good morning, Dee. Good morning, Sherry. Hopefully, you guys are all having a good morning today. I am so glad it's Friday. You guys have no idea. I have had such a busy week. It has been a really busy week. In fact, I kind of been thinking about only doing a show on Mondays and Fridays because at least I would have some consistency. Almost never do I have to work early on a Monday morning or on a Friday morning. Wednesdays are my busiest days. Thursdays can be pretty busy. Tuesday, depending on the day. This week I was here Monday, Tuesday, and of course today, Friday. But I thought about having Colonel Joe Adams. He and I have talked about it before. Do like a guest host on Wednesday, then me be here Monday, me be here Friday. Because really, there's no reason to have a show every day now, is there? It seems like there's not too much craziness going on. Good morning, Carl. Good to see you joining us this morning. So Colonel Adams and I have talked about that. I think he would make a great guest host for the show on Wednesdays, and then I will be here on Monday and Friday. We'll see. We'll see. I'm kind of trying to figure it out. I'm getting ready to head into my busy season with work, so it's like instead of and gardening, not to mention that, instead of just missing days very randomly, at least I'd have something consistent. Sometimes consistency is a good thing. And Carl says, "Good morning, America." You got that right, Carl. Lots to talk about today, good and bad, as always. Donald Trump. I'm going to read a statement that he released to you. Donald Trump says, "Hey, let's open the classified files." He's probably saying that because of Obama. I'm going to play that video here in a few moments of Obama talking about how aliens are real. I played it the other day, but that was before Donald Trump responded. Then Trump came on. He's like, "Hey, that's classified information. He shouldn't have said that." And all of a sudden, Trump wants to disclose what he knows. But Trump's not a believer, so we'll see. Good morning, Karen. Sherry says it is not normal. Oh, thank you, Sherry. I appreciate you letting me be part of your day. That is for sure. And it's quite honestly, it's not normal for me either when I'm not here. It's so weird because I'm used to talking to people, you guys. I know it's a show and I'm the one standing here at the camera, but I'm talking to you guys. We're communicating back and forth. You're, commenting and I'm talking to you. So it's so strange to me, during the day where I've got all this news to share and I'm just posting it on social media, but it's weird to not talk about it. And Carl, I'm only here for a short time this morning. Well, darn you, Carl. Good morning, Kim. Good to see you. So we're going to talk about the Trump alien release, whether or not this is our disclosure. How many times on the show have we been talking lately about these anti-ICE protests at schools across the country and how maybe they should lose their federal funding? School is, it doesn't matter which side you're on. Quite honestly, it doesn't matter whether you're conservative or liberal. Kids need to be in school learning, right? Not out protesting anything, quite honestly. I'm obviously conservative, but if it was a conservative issue, I would never say, "Hey, kids, leave the classroom and go out and protest." School is for learning. So we're going to talk about that a little bit because some schools are set to lose state funding if they continue to do so. And Sherry says the elites are the real reptile aliens. Man, Sherry, we're going to have some elite stories for you today. Nancy, happy Friday. That's right, Nancy. Happy Friday and Lent. Lent's my favorite time of the year. And we're going to talk about some of the Epstein fallout and what's happening with Les Wexner. Now, we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. But here's what's crazy. Just when I was getting the show started today and had planned on talking about Les Wexner anyway, as well as the Huffines family that has purchased Zorro Ranch, because I know I've talked about that already a couple times this week, but I can't shake the feeling that I have. I just cannot shake it. And so I have to talk about it again and get your opinion. But Les Wexner, as I was getting ready to jump on the show this morning, I read that no longer is the Department of Justice pursuing Les Wexner and his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. He is listed as a co-conspirator, but he is no longer going to be pursued. And I'm going to play a little video. You may have already seen it, an interaction with him and his attorney. We're going to talk about that Huffines family that has purchased the Zorro Ranch. We're going to talk about Iran. Iran has made a new threat against the United States. And, you probably know this already, but right now we have the largest buildup, military buildup in the Middle East. We haven't had a buildup like this since the Iraqi war. So something obviously is going on. I mean, we've been talking about this for probably about 8 weeks now. We've been waiting for something to happen. And Trump disappoints me every day when he says, well, we're going to give him 10 more days to say, and I think maybe his latest, we're going to give him 10 more days is just a bluff, because obviously he doesn't want to say, hey, Iran, today is the day we're going to strike. So he's like, oh, we'll give him 10 more days. And then Iran threatened us, and hopefully it's going to be over for them. Good morning, Mr. J. Van Brown. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk at the very end of the show for anyone who is tuning in only to talk about the Guthrie case. I'm not going to talk about that till the very end of the show, because I know a lot of you don't care and are tired of hearing about it. And so if you want to hear about it, you can stick around to the very end, and that's what we'll talk about. There's not a whole lot of new information, but I do have some things that I definitely want to discuss, because there's a lot going on. I think there's a lot of cover-up going on by the Pima County Sheriff Department, and there may be people who will disagree, but I think it's happening. I think they're coddling the family and not really telling us what they should. And everybody can, if you're on the comment line, check out Carl's shameless plug. Are any of you guys on X, by the way? I've been getting a notification for the past week that X, there's a problem with their live streaming. So I'm not sure if the show is live streaming on X. I don't have a whole lot of folks who watch from X. Most people are here on Facebook, and then a couple over on YouTube. And Linda, good morning, Linda. You guys probably got a good storm yesterday too. You're usually in the path before it gets to me. So, oh, you are, Sherry, you are on X. That's weird, because it says you're on Facebook, but I know the streaming's like all mixed up. So who knows where anything is right now. So let's see. There's so many places to start. Let's start here. Good morning, Eric. We've seen these anti-ICE protests taking places at schools. And, it's kind of interesting, but there are some school administrators who are starting to stand up, and they're starting to say, I have had enough of this. Now, of course, we know there's a lot of school administrators who are all for it and promote these anti-ICE walkouts. But I thought this was interesting. And now, of course, this is in Florida, but I'm going to read you the statement. There supposedly is a video coming around. I couldn't find the video of this. I could only find the photo, but I'm just going to read it to you. Now, this took place in, I believe, Clay County, Florida. And in Florida, the Commissioner of Education has banned these anti-ICE protests. And in fact, they banned all protests during school hours. So this is what the administrator said. And I absolutely love this. It says, if you go back to, I'll set the stage, I guess. They had some students who had planned an anti-ICE protest. The school said, no more, we'll lose our state funding, no more, of these anti-ICE protests. And so therefore they canceled the event. Well, some students decided they were going to go out and protest anyway. So they left the school, they were out in the parking lot doing their anti-ICE protest when the administrator came out. And this is exactly what he said. And he's right. And I love what he said, and he phrased it perfectly. He says, if you go back to class, then we're good. If you stay out here, we will get your names and you will be suspended, okay? He said that is your option at this point, because you are operating outside of the bounds of what was granted. That event was canceled. You left school without permission. Your rights do not supersede the school. Exactly that. Your rights do not supersede the school. So if you understand that, that is your option. If you wish to return, Dr., in this case, Damiani, We'll let you in the door over there. If you do not want to go back to class, I will be getting your names. You will be suspended. Those are your options. Your rights do not exceed that of the school. And I love that. Carl, my ex handle is Tabitha Hassell, just my name. And I couldn't agree more with this administrator. Jay says, outside of school, go for it. During school, no. Exactly, Jay. On your own time, students, if you want to go out and anti-ICE protest, go for it. Eat your little hearts out. Get out and protest all you want. But some of these, as you probably have seen some of the videos, some of these anti-ICE protests at schools have been just completely out of hand. I think I played a video maybe last week of that, and there have been assaults. There's, as a matter of fact, I think I don't know if it's a principal or administrator in one area that is being investigated right now because he and a student got in some type of altercation over, getting back into class. And it's completely out of control. School is for learning. You arrive in the morning, you're there to learn. And can you imagine the chaos? Schools have to be kept in an orderly fashion. Everybody knows that. If you don't keep an orderly fashion at school, you're going to have utter chaos. And that is exactly what's happening in some of these schools across the country, complete chaos, where we have kids, they said, coming and going at all different times, using, some of these kids don't even care about these anti-ICE protests, but of course they're going to participate because they get out of school. That's lessons they're not learning. That's days that they get set back, tests potentially missed, and the school has had no control over it. And so now, a lot of states are stepping forward. Now, this is a state by state rule. It's not a federal rule, but some states are ruling that if you, the school, allows your kids, your students to go out and protest for any reason, has nothing to do with ICE, just for any reason, you're going to lose your state funding. If you're a public school or even a private school, if you get any money from the state, you're going to lose it. And Texas, Governor Greg Abbott was just warned, from what I understand, by his, I think they call it in Texas, maybe the Secretary of Education, I think I read. Well, that person warned Governor Greg Abbott, hey, you better put the message out to Texas schools, because if these schools continue to allow this anti-ICE protesting, we're going to take away their state funding. And I think it's absolutely, absolutely necessary that we do exactly that. Why should we be taxpayers be paying money to put kids through school? And these kids don't even want to be in school. They would rather be out protesting law enforcement. That's the worst part of it, is protesting law enforcement. I hate to say this. I don't want to blame it on the parents, because I know, and some parents have no control over their kids. Kids have so many outside influences besides what's at the home. You can be the most perfect parent, you really can. And yet, you still have kids sometimes that do what they need to do outside of you. I've got a couple of friends who have multiple children, and there might be one or two out of the group that no matter how good the parents do, the kids just got their own minds. And that's kind of the case here. Some of these kids are out of control. And I've been reading stories too about parents withdrawing their kids from school and putting them in other schools or putting them in private schools because they don't want to support and give, money to a school that is allowing these protests to take place. And good morning, Curtis. Good to see you this morning. So I wanted to throw that in because we have talked about that quite a bit. So we'll see how Governor Abbott handles that. I want to talk a little bit about Iran because it's a really big issue right now. Then we're going to talk about aliens. How can you not talk about aliens? We're going to talk about Epstein. We're probably going to talk about Epstein first and then the aliens. How about that? Weird day, but hey, it's Friday. That's what Fridays are for. So this is kind of interesting. So Iran wrote a letter to the United States, directing it to, of course, President Trump. But they did make the letter public because they want everyone to see what's going on and what their plans are. Now, I've always called Iran that little yappy dog. They bark a lot, little do they bite, and I actually, for the most part, have defended Iran's regime when it comes to war because, Iran, now what they're doing to their citizens is horrific. It really is. It is absolutely horrific. But Iran has not invaded another country, since the Ottoman Empire. That's just not their thing to invade other countries. But the oppression within their own country is atrocious. And they've really pushed the limits recently with mowing down, these protesters in the streets, gunning them down, mowing them down. When they're injured and they go to the hospital, they go through the hospitals and they go room to room and take care of whatever they didn't get done earlier. And there's been thousands of deaths. I don't know if we'll ever know the true number of deaths, not to mention the people that are missing. So I no longer care that Iran is not that country that usually invades other countries. Now I know they have their proxies. I've had this argument with people many times over the years. People will say, okay, well maybe Iran doesn't invade other countries, but they have their proxies. They have the Houthis, they have Hezbollah, and yes, there's no question about it. But so do we. Do you think the United States doesn't have proxies? We do exactly the same thing. As a matter of fact, Al Qaeda. I kind of read an article last night, or I shouldn't say an article. I just read the headline that there's a surgency of Al Qaeda. I'm like, you mean the United States? Because we support Al Qaeda, and we have since Obama, and probably long before that. So we certainly have our proxies too. And good morning, Lookout, who is over on X. And so I thought this was kind of interesting. Like I said earlier, we currently have the largest buildup of military troops, aircraft carriers, warships, etc., in the Middle East. We haven't had a military buildup like this since the Iraqi war. And I think that says a lot. Now, some people say it's just posturing. We're just there to force Iran to shut down their nuclear weapons, to no longer produce uranium. But here's the thing, or enrich uranium. But is that really what we're doing? Because we talked on the show, I don't know, it really probably has been about 8 weeks ago, where we had our first troops going over kind of undercover. They headed over there. A lot of us knew that they did. It wasn't being necessarily talked about on the news for a few days later. And at that time, we're like, okay, we have all these violent protests going on, violence against the protesters, not the protesters being violent. But we have all these protests going on in Iran. We're so close to toppling the regime. We had all of these people talking to us. I have a lot of different inside sources. I'm sure some of you do too. Some of it's probably been in the media, and some we just know is probably true. But a lot of the information that we've been told is that we, the United States, along with Israel, we had operatives on the ground. We got these protests started with the goal of getting rid of the regime. And quite honestly, that's how a coup is, isn't it? It's happened so many times in so many other countries where you have instigators, where they come in and they get the people riled up. They arm them. They give them everything they need. They'll give them tools so that they can gather together and come together for one solid purpose. We, under Obama, we did it in Syria. Under Donald Trump, we did it again in Syria. So we certainly have done it many times over in the past. And that's exactly what's been happening in Iran. But what's taking so long? We set the stage, we got everything ready, and we should have jumped in before we had thousands of people's lives lost. And here we are still talking about diplomacy. Like I said, Donald Trump just said yesterday, we're going to give Iran 10 more days. Well, Iran, they're never going to agree to stop their nuclear program. We all know that. And I'm sure he knows that too. So, it's probably one of those situations where he doesn't want to say, okay, Iran, today's the day, we're going to conduct our airstrikes. He's probably going to want to, do that a little bit sooner, a little bit under the radar. Jay says, two wrongs don't make a right either. Correct, Jay. Jay says, Iran has the biggest sponsor of state terror and oppression since the 70s. Cowards hiding behind others. No question about that, Jay. And I've had it with Iran. I will no longer, give them any type of never, I've always said, like I said, I've always defended them. No more. What they're doing right now is too far. And there's just, we Americans, there's nothing we can do about it. We're just waiting for Donald Trump to give that final order to say, okay, it is time. Let's do what we need to do. The regime has had a plan in place for a long time. We've talked about that before. The Ayatollah, his staff, they're all going to head over to Moscow. We already know these things are probably going to play out exactly like that. But what are we going to do? Why do we have this military buildup there? And then Iran comes out with this statement. And Donald Trump, when he sees this, he's going to be like, all right, Iran, it is on. This is what Iran said. He said, in the event that the Islamic Republic of Iran is subjected to military aggression, it will respond decisively and proportionately in the exercise of its inherent right of self-defense under Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations. In such circumstances, all bases, facilities, and assets of the hostile force in the region would constitute legitimate targets in the context of Iran's defensive response. The United States would bear full and direct responsibility for any unpredictable and uncontrolled consequences. Now, Iran just threatened us a few days ago. They said they were going to sink our aircraft carriers to the bottom of the sea. So they've been full of threats lately. That's not unusual for them. They have made this exact statement many times before, and they have never done anything. But I think this time they have to know that their removal is imminent. You know, we cannot allow all of these Iranians to fight and lose their lives in vain. And really, I'm never usually in favor of replacing a regime, no matter how awful they are. I always feel like we're not the world's police. You know, I really do. I don't want us to get involved. In this case, I feel differently. I think that in order for us to ever obtain any amount of peace in that region, we have to replace the regime of Iran. And what they're doing to their people is not okay. And Iran certainly is not the only country where the regime is oppressive and doing things they shouldn't be doing, to their citizens, of course. We could go right down the line with that one. And Jay says, I think Trump has been trying to shore up more support for foreign allies. And that could be so, Jay, because we see a little bit of division. China has definitely said they don't support the United States or Israel planning any type of attack against Iran. We have Afghanistan saying, hey, if you guys attack Iran, we're going to give them our full support. I don't think Afghanistan will attack us because we pay them too much money. But I think that a lot of the support people will be giving to Iran, if this plays out, this very well, and I don't know which one of you, it might have been Carl, might have been Jay, I'm not sure who. I know one of you guys were pointing out to me the other day that this could end up escalating into something much bigger, because a lot of people talking about World War III. And I have been saying that I don't see this escalating that far. I see us going in, conducting some airstrikes. The Ayatollah hopefully will realize his time is over and take off out of there. Just unfortunately, I know I liked Assad, unfortunately, like Assad did in Syria. But I think the Ayatollah's time is up. I think Donald Trump needs to stop trying to be diplomatic. But to what you said, Jay, is that, good morning, Matt, is that Donald Trump has to be diplomatic. I am an impatient person when it comes to foreign policy. I am ready for Donald Trump to go push the button and say, okay, now it's time. Here's the button. This is your whatever release you need to have, generals, set your troops on fire. Let's do it. Let's get it over with. Let's get those airstrikes out. But I know it's not that easy, because if we did that, we're going to have half the world coming at us saying, you should have given them more warnings and all this other stuff. So we've given them all the warnings. We went down the diplomatic route. They're still threatening us. So it is. I do think the airstrikes are imminent. I just don't know. Is it going to be today? Is it going to be tomorrow? Is Donald Trump going to wait those 10 days, and then after those 10 days going to wait another 10 days? I don't know. I think it's like you said, Jay. I think he's going to wait until he thinks that he has the support, and it's starting to fall in line. I see a lot of support coming his way, but it has to be done. I normally would never support something like this. I don't like to support it. I'm 100% against war, 100% against being the world police, but sometimes it just has to happen, and the reason why I think I feel this way about Iran is because we all know it's us, the United States. It's our fault that regime came into power anyway. We did that. That's our fault. And now we owe it to the people, for their freedom. So I hope we do that. I hope we do that. Some of the things I want to jump into. Now, I have talked a lot. It's Friday, so I feel like we can talk about some crazy stuff. But I do want to talk about the Epstein files. I don't even know why I say that's crazy. I guess because when you look at the Epstein files, you think of it as nothing but conspiracy. And the reason why is because there's nothing solid there. Okay, so we have this guy who we've been hearing for many years, who's been indicted on 53 counts of different types of trafficking charges and different things. And we hear all these different stories. We have Maxwell, of course, sitting in jail for something similar, but all we have are emails. As we said the other day, the CIA allegedly has all of the videotapes. There's supposedly over 10,000 videos, because Epstein had these little pinhole cameras, in all of his properties. And so everything's on video. According to Congresswoman Nancy Mace, CIA has all of those videotapes. That's the smoking gun. right? That's the smoking gun. So we can look at these emails and say, okay, we can look at these investigative reports and say, okay, it looks like Les Wexner, a billionaire, is a co-conspirator. It looks like Bill Clinton has been to the ranch X number of times. It looks like Bill Clinton has been on the Lolita Express, Epstein's plane numerous times. It looks like Hillary's been there. We could go down the whole list of all the people who are mentioned in these emails. And you probably saw that Prince Andrew was arrested yesterday with over his involvement, of course. And that's because he was, I can't remember the term of it now, suspicion of doing something or another while holding his office. I don't know if you call that an office or not, whatever his royalty might have been. But they've released him. He's not going to be charged with anything. They've released him. Nothing's going to happen there. And then we have Lex Wexner, who, of course, is supposed to be the big co-conspirator, right? He has emerged as one of the bigger names in the Epstein files. Well, just as I was coming on the show this morning, I saw the big news bulletin that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, is no longer pursuing any type of investigation into Les Wexner. So, I mean, that's that, right? So, where's the accountability at? Margie says Trump pushed his little buttons with Venezuela. Yes, he did. And he needs to push those buttons again. Carl says the issue is the Strait. This has to be a hard and fast hit. And let me backtrack a little bit. Carl's talking about the Strait of Hormuz because that is where all of the petroleum comes back and forth. And if you recall, the last time Iran did close the Strait of Hormuz for a very short time. And I remember kind of the backup that was taking place. And we've got to keep that strait open. If Iran tries to do that again, that will definitely be the end of them. Now, I want to show you this video of Lex Wexner. You may have seen this. I posted this on social media. He is being, I wouldn't call it interrogated. He's in a meeting with attorneys talking about the Epstein files. His attorney is with him, and I think his name is Michael Levy, from what I understand. And his attorney, I'm going to turn up you got to turn your volume up for this one. So he's answering these questions. He looks happy. He's not worried. Nothing's going to happen to him, but he's answering questions, I guess somewhat truthfully, or at least giving bigger answers. And the attorney leans over. I'm going to play this. Hopefully you can hear what he's saying.
It was just regularly done.
Answer the question.
Okay, so did you hear what he said? His attorney, Michael Levy, leaned over and he told Les Wexner, I'm going to effing kill you if you continue to answer questions with more than 5 words. Because, of course, any defense attorney is going to say, hey, talk as little as you possibly can. Usually they say yes or no answers or don't answer at all. And he's giving these big explanations to these questions. And the attorney's like, hey, knock it off. Probably because they know he's guilty. But, he's an old man. Nothing's going to happen to him. And now we know for sure nothing's going to happen to him. The smoking gun is the videos. We're never going to have those videos. The CIA will never release those videos. And Donald Trump has no control over the CIA. I think we all know that. He has no control over the CIA. He cannot order the CIA to release those videos. And quite honestly, no offense against Donald Trump, but I don't think he would do it anyway. He's had plenty of opportunity to order the release of some of these files. He could have easily told Pam Bondi to clarify that list of names, to say, well, these are the names of the people who actually have been named by the victims. These are the names who we believe, to have taken part in trafficking or the abuse of women or minors. These are the names that allowed us to have 53 indictments against Jeffrey Epstein and to put Ghislaine Maxwell in jail. But they didn't do that. They muddied up the list by putting all these random names in there that have absolutely nothing to do with anything. I mean, Janis Joplin, Queen Elizabeth II, Elvis Presley, all these names on the list. I mean, that's just to muddy up the list. There's no question that's what that's about. And so I hope my battery doesn't die on us. I guess I better talk fast. And so I don't know what is going on. I have my laptop charged, but all of a sudden it's like 5% battery, and I don't know why, but we'll figure it out. And again, there's no smoking gun. Then we have the Zorro Ranch. Nobody ever wants to talk about the Zorro Ranch. We've talked about it, twice? This will be the 3rd time this week, because it is also potentially another smoking gun. We've lost the videos. We're never going to have access to those videos. Everything in the emails is circumstantial. An attorney will twist those words around to mean absolutely nothing. So forget the emails. There's nothing there. There's no videos to back up the emails, nothing there. You can think all you want that you think this person is guilty and realize that there's a very big portion of our civilization that is flat out disgusting and vile, right? And murderous, torturous at that. But we have the Zorro Ranch, and the Zorro Ranch is the other smoking gun. Now, investigators believe there are at least 2 bodies buried on the Zorro Ranch, 2 young female victims that they, throughout their investigation, they determined had been murdered. And there's a lot of evidence, I think, to point, circumstantial evidence, to even more homicides. And so it's always been believed that these 2 girls, maybe other people, are buried at the Zorro Ranch. And as you know, it was recently revealed that Donald Huffines, he's a Texas guy, I believe he made his wealth in the real estate market, from what I understand. He's a developer, I believe. And so Donald Huffines and his brother Philip Huffines are involved now with the Zorro Ranch. Now they have purchased the Zorro Ranch. I'm going to play a video in a minute where you can hear this video from Don Huffings talking about how he wants to turn the Zorro Ranch into a Christian retreat. But I think what's interesting is, and again, we talked about this the other day. I'm going to talk about it again because there's a little bit more that's going on. But Don Huffings originally said no, he would not allow an investigation at the Zorro Ranch. He would not allow it. And whenever he said that, man, that was like red flags everywhere for me. Like, okay, you're MAGA, you're conservative, you're a patriot, you're a friend of Donald Trump. You're, trying to win the office of comptroller in the state of Texas, and he campaigns on being the Doge of Texas. He's going to go through an audit, just like Doge would, and get. He was, in fact, he ran for governor and did not get elected as governor, so therefore now he's running for comptroller. And I know very little. I've never even heard much about Donald Huffines until recently. Kind of always on the back burner. I've heard about him when he was running for governor. Nothing since. And now all of a sudden he's bought this Zorro Ranch. Now, New Mexico officials said, well, we are going to investigate the potential possibility that homicides have occurred at that property and that there are people buried, these 2 young girls, on that property. Now, eventually, he had no choice but to comply. So it's not a situation of where he welcomed the investigation. It was a situation where he has no choice but to go along with this investigation. But here's the thing. And I think where the red flags come for me, and I hope I'm wrong. It's like, I just can't shake this feeling I have. I'm going to play the video for you here in a second. Is that, what he says? Then he comes out and he says, you know what? I'm going to, I've already started construction. We're turning it into a Christian retreat. The construction has already started. And then I'm thinking, okay, here there are potentially bodies buried and you're already starting construction. Now, isn't that kind of a red flag? It is to me. Let's see, Mr. Pardo. Trump has been mentioned 38,000 times. The allegations of various crimes, his friends and donors are involved. I think, Mr. Pardo, I will say again, and I've said from mostly the beginning, that yes, Trump's name is in those files. If you read the book Pervasion of Justice, I can't remember, is it Julie Brown that wrote that? I can't recall the author's name. You'll see Donald Trump's name mentioned in that book. But at the same time, like we have also said many times, if Donald Trump was one of the people that the victims accused of harming them, it would have been out there a long time ago. And I know that Democrats would have used anything they could to go against Donald Trump. Remember one time in 2016 during that campaign, Hillary Clinton, in 2015, she hired a group, I can't remember how many, it was like almost 100, I think, of researchers. She had them come in and they researched Donald Trump. They turned over every single rock there could possibly be to find dirt on Donald Trump. And outside of his affairs, his marriage problems, they couldn't come up with anything. There was nothing there. Now, you and I both know that if there was something there about Donald Trump in these Epstein files, Hillary Clinton's team would have been the first people to say it, because they would have done anything they could to make sure Donald Trump did not win that election in 2016. Even if they had to throw some of their own people under the bus to name Donald Trump, they would have done it, because the last thing that Democrats wanted was Donald Trump in the White House, right? And they didn't. They didn't say anything. Nothing came out about it. And then again, 2024, they're even more angry at Donald Trump. But again, at no point has anyone come out and said, here is the proof you need. This is the evidence that Donald Trump has trafficked women, has harmed women, has sexually assaulted women, or been with minors. Nothing. So I feel like there's nothing that came from that. And Mr. Parnell says anyone protecting a pedophile is the same as a pedophile. I agree. And that's why I talk about the Epstein files so much. And Glenn says the Dems just don't give it up. No, they don't. Now, Mr. Parnell, if you're talking about him, is not a Democrat. But there's a lot of people who aren't Democrats who also do believe that Trump was involved. But I don't see it. Folks involved. I don't know what just happened there. Oh, we like blinked out for a second and then came back. So I'm going to play this video of Donald Huffines talking about the Christian retreat.
Take something evil and bring it into goodness, bring it into light and positivity. Tell us about that plan.
Well, of course, that is the main reason I bought the property. This was obviously a dark place, and we wanted to put light in a dark place. It always shines the brightest when you do that. My faith is so strong in Jesus, and it really is. And I'm going to make this, the plan all along is to make this property into a Christian retreat. As a matter of fact, it's under construction today. And that's our goal. That's why we named it San Rafael. We named it Saint Raphael, as you probably know, an archangel, and his what he does and helps people with is healing and being the healer, and also blessing those that are traveling. And we think that's really germane.
Now Don Huffines may be just a super nice guy. He may be the absolute epitome of Christianity. I don't know. I don't know him, but I would think that the state of New Mexico would, have some type of injunction to say, okay, you have to stop construction. This is an active crime scene potentially. We are coming out and investigating homicides. We're looking for bodies. So you need to halt construction right now. I haven't seen that happening yet. I hope somebody in New Mexico is paying attention and they do exactly that, because, while we can't do anything about the emails, that's circumstantial. There will be no prosecutions over anything that's coming in those emails. It'll be zero accountability. There are people who are stepping down, voluntarily, but that's more about public perception. That's more about donors. That's more about money. And those people kind of fade into the background. Somebody was talking about Pritzker. Yeah, his own brother, stepped down from the Hyatt hotels. Glenn says, did Mr. Parnell read the FBI report about Trump being an informant? Probably, but see, there's a lot of people who you can read that, but if you think Donald Trump is guilty, then there's nothing that's going to change your mind from thinking that he harmed young girls or was in the process of trafficking women. I've already learned that that's kind of a brick wall. If somebody believes that Donald Trump is involved, there's no getting around that. I absolutely agree that all of those emails point to Donald Trump being an informant. And he's been speaking about it. You can go back and find videos of Trump talking about this many years ago. It's not just like it happened recently. There's a video, gosh, I know I haven't saved. I didn't even think to load it up today because I didn't plan on talking about that. But where he talks then about Epstein and Maxwell being so disgusting and gross, and talks about how he has, doesn't want to have anything to do with them. That was many years ago. You can tell because the video has that really old look, and he was, young in that a lot younger in that video. And let's see here. Lori says there is nothing good about the fact that construction has started. I couldn't agree more, Lori. They better put an injunction in. Patty says, we know evil Epstein was doing business worldwide. The CIA and the foreign countries might be forcing the DOJ to not expose evil names. In my opinion, the CIA is the head of the deep state. They are controlling the mainstream media to stay focused on the Nancy case 24/7. That could be, Patty. That could be. It could be that. Could be public interest. A lot of people are interested in that case. Patty says to keep the evil Epstein files off MSM. Surprisingly enough, I've been posting some Epstein stuff lately, and it is getting more traction than what it used to. I used to be that I would post something about Epstein and nobody would ever see it. So I have noticed my posts are getting a little bit more views. I can see how many people view the post. I can't see who, but I can see how many. And so I'm getting a little bit more traction. But, then like I said the other day, the second red flag to me about the Huffines family, and again, I'm probably just lost my mind. Maybe I've gone down the conspiracy hole too many times. Maybe the Huffines are just wonderful, very nice patriots, good people trying to do the right thing. That absolutely 100% could be the case. I don't know why. I just have this feeling that there is something more to this. And of course, Turning Point USA, like we talked about the other day on the show, they have now endorsed Donald Huffines as comptroller for the state of Texas. And I'm thinking, you've heard so much about, and I don't know if I believe, it's so hard to know what to believe and what not to believe, isn't there? But you hear so much about maybe what really happened to Charlie Kirk. Maybe there were really, maybe I've got to draw a line somewhere in how far I go down this rabbit hole, at least verbally on the show. But there's a lot of talk in different circles about what happened to Charlie, that maybe this was planned out a long time ago, that eventually he would be assassinated. And not because he's a Christian, not because he's a conservative, but because Turning Point USA, just like Elon Musk's America PAC, very instrumental in getting Donald Trump back into office in 2024. And they are growing more powerful, by the day. They're getting millions and millions of dollars coming into their organization, and they're starting at the bottom, and they're getting all these Christian conservatives, into these different positions. And it's going to change politics for probably at least the rest of our lives, what Turning Point was doing. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's like, okay, they don't really trust Turning Point anymore. And I don't know how much money is still coming into Turning Point, or if they're still going to, work on campaigns like they did under Charlie Kirk. So, and I'm not saying anything. Like I said, I got to be very careful what I say here, because I don't want to go too far, across any lines. But it does kind of make you wonder, if you really sat down and you really connected all the dots, you'd be like, okay, Epstein was working for various governments. Some say Israel. I've heard other governments. I've heard the United States CIA. I think maybe he was an operative for many different governments. Maybe they're all a big part of this crazy network. And people are weak. We know that there are weak people, men and women. And it would be very easy to say, okay, you find out what somebody's weakness is, and then you lure them in. Because what do men like? Most men, they like girls, right? And a lot of them like underage girls. A lot of them have weird fetishes and different things like that. All normal part of life. And, and so it could be that Epstein said, okay, he found out what these weaknesses were. It's kind of a strategy. It goes back to the beginning of time, right? He probably had operatives out there, women who found out what these guys liked, arranged some type of situation, had a hidden camera, and then use that as leverage or blackmail against that person, against different countries, a lot of different things. And so I absolutely do believe that he was more than just some guy out trafficking people. I really do think there's so much more to it. I don't see any evidence he was a very good financial guy. How did he make all of his money? From what I understand, he didn't even go to college, but yet he became a professor. It doesn't make any sense. Nothing about this guy makes any sense. He was not an intelligent person. He doesn't even know how to capitalize letters. He didn't even capitalize his name, which to me, when I see that, I'm like, oh yeah, that's not good. That's not good. If you don't capitalize, that's kind of a problem in my mind anyway. And Patty says, we were told Pizzagate was a conspiracy theory. It wasn't. That's another one, Patty. Good morning, Kevin. Exactly that. Exactly that. And Mr. Pardo says, Glenn, you are protecting pedophiles. Trump is protecting pedophiles. That makes him no different. I don't know. Carl, you have a good weekend too. I don't know. Could you consider Donald Trump as protecting pedophiles? I mean, I think you could say that. I mean, I hate to say that. You guys know I like Donald Trump. But at the same time, Trump as the president could go through that list and say, hey, Pam Bondi, I'm your boss. We have victim testimony. Write out a list of all of the people who victims accuse. Put out the context. Just don't give us a list of names. Give the context. Say this person did this person did that. These are witness testimonies, but we don't have that. You could say that is partly, you could blame Donald Trump for that. But I think it's protecting more than pedophiles. I think it's protecting all of these different secrets that they obtained through all of these different people and all of these different CEOs and world leaders that somehow got embroiled in all of this. And I think I like I said the other day, somebody keeps saying, well, it would just tear our country apart. It would tear the government apart in most countries, I would think. And in my opinion, I'm just like, so be it. And I think it was Jay said, no, we can't do that. China will take over. I'm like, if it tears us apart from the seams, let it happen. I am so tired of this evilness. I look at the news every day and all I see is gosh, the other day it was some mayor of some town sniffing what I believe must be his stepdaughter's underpants when she goes to school. She set up a camera because she knew something was going on and caught him. And I'm like, then you hear these crazy stories about just trafficking and abuse and children and women. And it's upsetting. I really kind of some days wake up in the morning. I think those of us who would never do such a thing, maybe we're the rarity. Maybe the rest of the world is just evil and satanic. And we're just the rarity. I don't know. It's just rampant. That's all I can say. It's just rampant. When it comes to the Satanism, Zorro Ranch is the place where they say all that happened. They say, again, I told you guys the other day, that movie Eyes Wide Shut. Now, this is, again, conspiracy theory, where they say that movie was made by Stanley Kubrick based on what took place at the Zorro Ranch. Is that true? I don't know. I have no way of knowing, absolutely no way of knowing. And we can only guess. But I do think a lot of evilness did happen at the Zorro Ranch. Apparently, Donald Huffines believes too. And I thought this was kind of interesting too. Like I said, I'm not going to connect the dots because I'm too scared what might be at the end. Let's put it that way. I'm not going to connect those dots because I think if I sat down, I could connect a lot of dots because I do in my head. I see it in my head. I don't want to put it on paper and I don't want to talk about it because I think if I did, the realization that I would come up with at the end would just change how I think about everything. But there are certainly a lot of dots that could be connected when it comes to Epstein, the files, the Zorro Ranch, the Huffines buying the ranch, TPUSA endorsing Donald Huffines for comptroller. We have Donald Huffing's son, Russell. He works directly for the Trump administration. He is the White House Office of Cabinet Affairs Associate Director of Agency Outreach. Now, we could turn this into a lot of different things. We could connect an awful lot of different dots and again, probably come out somewhere we don't want to be. Or we could flip it around and say, maybe Huffines truly did buy the Zorro Ranch because he really wants to do the right thing. He sees this as this terribly evil place. He wants to turn that evil around. There are plenty of Christians, of course, who believe that you take something evil and you turn it good, and that's better for the world. So he may be, very genuine at heart. His son might work for the Trump administration because he's a Trump supporter. He's a big MAGA guy. So there may be nothing wrong at all here. I think what just threw me off is when Huffines said that he wouldn't allow the investigation. And then I started thinking, man, did he buy the Zorro Ranch to cover up an investigation? Did he buy it so that we'll never find the bodies? Because if you think about it, it makes perfect sense that if you want to hide, let's say there are bodies buried on the Zorro Ranch and you don't ever want anyone to ever discover them, well, then what do? You make sure the right person purchases that property. Just take yourself as an example. Let's say you had some crazy wild nights and whatever you did wrong, you got a body buried out in your backyard. You're a terrible criminal. Well, you don't want anyone to ever discover it, but you pass away and your family's still around. And let's say whatever that situation might be, maybe your employers, and they say, man, Carl has a body buried in his backyard. If somebody finds that body, we're all going to go down. So let's make sure that property is purchased by someone we know. And then we'll make sure that no one ever discovers it. And we'll put it in the name of an LLC. So that way that property will carry on and on and on. We'll build it into a retreat. And then forever that will be a retreat. It won't be a private home. I don't know. I'm not seeing. My mind's going in some places here that I should probably just quit talking about it. Drew says, so we have a mayor sniffing at 14-year-old babies. We have some very sick people in this country. Yes, Drew, we do. And Mr. Parnell, Tabitha, find the Marjorie Taylor Greene interviews where she tells who was the person fighting to keep the Epstein files from coming out. I saw it. I agree. I know that Donald Trump has fought to keep those files from coming out. I'm not disagreeing with you. There's no question about it. I mean, there's plenty of video of that. There's plenty of statements about it. The fact that he is the president, he absolutely is part of the reason why the files did not come out or they were released the way they were. There's no question about it. But again, it doesn't mean because he is a pedophile or he trafficked people or because he's involved. It could be the fact that he knows what it would do, to our government. He could lead to the collapse of our government. It could lead to the collapse of quite a few things, quite honestly. I don't care about that. I would rather see it collapse and know the truth instead of protecting a bunch of pedophiles and Satanists. Jay says maybe he didn't want the headache that would come. He would potentially lose property if it gets labeled a crime scene. Devil's advocate. Maybe, Jay. Like I said, and I'm glad you're playing the devil's advocate because my mind is going in a place that's very deep and dark. And I don't see, I don't know, I don't see any good coming that way. I feel bad for saying that because they could be great people. But yeah, it could be that, it could be exactly that. I don't know. I just don't know. I know he knows the allegations that are facing him. Well, something else I wanted to jump into, I got to stop talking about that because as you guys can probably see, my mind is going in 1,000 different directions and none of them are good. And I don't want to disparage these people, the Huffines. They could be absolutely fantastic, great people, salt of the earth Christians. And here I am thinking they're up to something because they don't want an investigation to occur. I can't help it. That's a big red flag to me, but that is sometimes how it goes. So anyway, let's switch gears a little bit because we'll probably talk about that again because I'm probably going to have a hard time getting past that. It's just once something's in my mind, I have a hard time with it. So anyway, so let's switch gears. Let's talk about some. Oh, you know what? Let me talk about something else first before we talk about the UFOs. I've got this video that I saw. Let me see if I can find it. Of McConnell. Have you seen this video of Mitch McConnell? No, you know me. I should start labeling these videos of Mitch McConnell. This guy, this is why we need term limits. What I don't hear from Congress and I don't hear from Donald Trump is we need term limits. We all say we need term limits, but no one ever, once they get into Congress, ever talks about term limits. And I think we all know why. McConnell is definitely one of those people, and this is going to give us a good lesson as to why we need term limits. Let me see if I turn the sound off. I hope this is the right video. Yeah, there he is. Look at that. I turned the sound off because it's some crazy song playing over it. They loop around whoever's video. I'll play this again. But there he is being helped to his car. And I feel sorry for this guy. I'm not making fun of him. I'm not being mean. I'm only saying that there comes a time when we need term limits and yes, age limits. Because we cannot have this. I'm going to try to stop this in the right spot here. There he is. They're helping him out. I mean, the poor man can barely even walk. See him? They have to help him. Now, I've been in this situation before where I was a caretaker for my grandmother and for my stepfather. And I remember getting to that phase where they can't walk and they're very weak and very frail. And you have to help them even just a few steps. And we've all seen McConnell stumble, at various events where he just, kind of zones out. We need age limits. And I'm not trying to say anything mean about this guy at all. It's a lot of people don't like McConnell and his policies, but I'm not saying anything mean about the guy. I am only saying we need age limits and we need term limits because there is no way you can tell me that his cognitive function is fine. How is Mitch McConnell making any decisions at all? Now, don't you think that people are making those decisions for him? Well, we didn't elect those people, right? We didn't elect those people. McConnell, I didn't elect him either, but McConnell was elected. He was put into that place. He does have his constituents, but he is not the person making these decisions. He might have some good cognitive moments. I don't know. And I'll tell you a video I wish I had. Yeah, Jay, he's a puppet at this point. And you know what? And so why isn't anyone standing up and saying, okay, McConnell, you've got to go? At what point, just like we saw with Joe Biden, does it become elder abuse to where you're pushing a person up, you're making them do things, and they have no idea what they're doing? And again, I'm not making fun of Joe Biden. I'm only saying, like I said so many times before, it's elder abuse. That man had no idea what was going on. Now, he might have had a couple moments of clarity, here and there, but for the most part, he had no idea what was going on. And in fact, I couldn't find a video for it. I'm going to look for it. I found a photo, but I don't have any way to photos. I have a really hard time loading photos onto the show. I don't know why, but it's hard. And I'm going to try to find a video. But so Biden was seen taking an Amtrak this week, and he was in the coach car with everybody else, and he had his Secret Service around. People were kind of talking to him. He was with a woman that nobody knew who she was, and he made the strangest statement. And he said, I'm with her, and we're going to get the babies, or something along that line. We're going to get the babies. Now, maybe he was talking about his grandchildren. I don't know what he was talking about, nor did anyone else that was around. They had no idea what he was talking about. And I'm going to have to see if I can find a video about that. Good morning, Scott. Good morning, Dan. Dan says, I remember one time when Biden was reading from a teleprompter and included the words in parentheses, pause to applause. I know I remember that, Dan. That was pretty funny, wasn't it? But it's not funny. It's sad, quite honestly. It's sad. But we have to have, and I'll go as far, if Donald Trump, if somebody can talk about his cognitive ability, if he's losing his cognitive ability, he has to go too. There's no side of the fence for this. If you're in the government, you're making decisions and you don't have a cognitive ability to make those decisions, or you have such a serious physical ailment that it affects your decision making, or it affects how often you're office. Biden, people remember when Trump's first term, they're like, oh, Trump's always out playing golf. He's always out doing this. You know what? Joe Biden, his first year, he was out 101 days. And all the other years, he was out even more than that. And he kept no log at all for those days that he was out. So we have no idea who he was meeting with, what they were talking about, what they were doing. Whoops, I dropped my phone. And we all know about the auto pen. It's unbelievable that this has happened right here in the United States. And yeah, and Kevin remembers that too, of course. All right, guys, let's get to the aliens. I know you know me, I talk way too much. Let's get to the aliens. Now, I hope I saved this video, and I think I did. Let's see here. Okay, I'm going to play this little video for you here. Now, we're going to talk about this a minute. The reason why we're bringing this up is how this snowball got started is that there was a video of Obama that resurfaced. I shared it myself. It resurfaced where Barack Obama was being interviewed. I don't know who he's being interviewed by. You guys might. And he's being interviewed, and this person says, hey, the typical question you would want to ask any president. And trust me, anytime I meet somebody who's a really high up official in the military, I always say, do aliens really exist? And I've been told numerous times by those people that yes, they do. And Obama is kind of the same situation. This guy says, hey, do aliens exist? And Obama, I'm just going to play the video for you here in a second. Or I guess I can just play it now. And then we'll go from there. We might even play it twice. Let's see. I've got a couple versions of this video. So I'm going to play this one first. This is Donald Trump's. They're going to give Donald Trump's statement first, and we're going to hear from Obama. Then I'm going to show you this other video.
Barack Obama said that aliens are real. Have you seen any evidence of non-human visitors to Earth?
Well, he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that.
So aliens are real.
Well, I don't know if they're real or not. I can tell you he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that. He made a big mistake. He took it out of classified information. No, I don't have an opinion on it. I never talk about it. A lot of people do. A lot of people believe it. Do you believe it, Peter?
The president can declassify anything that he wants to. So if you want to make an announcement,
I may get him out of trouble by declassifying.
Are aliens real?
They're real, but I haven't seen them, and they're not being kept in what is it?
Area 51.
Area 51. There's no underground facility, unless there's this enormous conspiracy, and they hid it from the President of the United States.
Okay, so I'm just going to throw this out there very quick. they're not at Area 51. That's actually true. I know somebody, I'm not going to, I've talked about it many times on the show, who told me that's at Wright Air Force Base. All of the stuff is at Wright Air Force Base. Wright Air Force Base goes many levels down into the earth, and that is where they keep all the biologics, is at Wright Air Force Base. And no one can get to it. It is very well protected. And even this guy that I know, he was, a general, and he told me, now he was retired by the time I talked to him, but he still worked for the Joint Chief of Staff, and he was still a senior, I think they called him a senior military, I can't remember, contractor of some type. But anyway, he works for the Defense Department, directly for the Joint Chief of Staff. And now, not anymore, that was a couple years ago, but that was the first question I asked him. First of all, I gave him a whole lot of shots. I made sure he was really good and drunk, so he would tell me his secrets. Not Epstein style, just alcohol. And I'm like, yeah, what about the aliens? And he's like, oh, yeah, he said he has the highest level security clearance there is, the highest level. And he explained to me all about the security clearances. And he told me that he knows it's at Wright Air Force Base. But when he went to Wright Air Force Base, they wouldn't let him down, in those floors. They wouldn't give him access to any of the files. There's a classification that is above even the president. As crazy as that sounds, it's even the president. So yes, they are briefed on information. We know Donald Trump's been briefed. We know every president is briefed. And as a matter of fact, I don't know about Biden. They might have been too scared he might slip up. But Donald Trump does not, he said before, he does not believe in aliens. He doesn't believe it. So it could be that he believes in angels and demons. He didn't specify. Maybe he doesn't believe there's anything, but he has said before he does not believe in alien life or extraterrestrial life. So I think that's kind of why he made that statement. But did you catch that last thing he said? And that he's going to get Obama out of trouble by declassifying the documents. Did you catch that? At the very last thing he said, maybe I'll get him out of trouble by declassifying the documents. And hold on a second. I dropped my phone. I know this is kind of crazy, but let me grab it because that's where my data is. All right. Sorry about that. I dropped my phone. So then, late last night, Donald Trump made this statement. Yeah, he put this on Truth Social late last night, and it says, based on the tremendous interest shown, I will be directing the Secretary of War and other relevant departments and agencies to begin the process of identifying and releasing government files related to alien and extraterrestrial life, unidentified aerial phenomena, and unidentified flying objects, and any and all other information connected to these highly complex but extremely interesting and important matters. God bless America. So I'm curious what you guys think about this. Do you think that disclosure is coming? Or do you think that it's just going to be more Epstein files where, okay, we're going to give the people what they want? But if he's sticking to his word where he says, all right, Obama said that aliens do exist, but they're not kept at Area 51. If you break this down, that Obama told classified information. It's classified to say, when you're the president of the United States, that aliens exist, and it's classified to say they're not at Area 51. Two statements there that broke the rules. So Donald Trump said he was going to make sure that Obama doesn't get in trouble by declassifying the files. So I'm going to guess that he is going to declassify the files for Area 51 and say, and I don't think, despite all the crazy video, I absolutely do not think there's anything alien going on at Area 51. There's a lot of defense things going on. I don't think the alien stuff is going on there. So I could see him declassifying that information. But then he's also going to have to declassify information that say aliens do exist, right? Because how else could he, counter Obama's statement and potentially declassify those documents to give Obama the right to say that aliens do exist? Jay says probably more lots of fluff, no substance. Probably, Jay. But, as I've said on the show before, does it really matter? Does it really matter? I know there are Americans who are waiting for the president, whether it's Donald Trump or some other president, to stand behind the podium on a stage and tell the American people, hey, this is a public address. We are declassifying these files. Yes, aliens do exist. No, they're not at Area 51. Yes, we have biologics, but they're somewhere else. how far down the line do you want him to go for Americans to finally say, wow, oh my gosh, it's true. And then everybody panic and go to the grocery store and buy all the food and take all their money out of the bank. Because there will be people who will do that if he stood on the stage and said that. Or you can be like me and a lot of other people like me, maybe some of you, where you'll say, okay, I have watched every single one of the UAP hearings, every single one. I have watched the David Grush interviews. And because I've watched the David Grush interviews and the UAP hearings, I already know pretty much everything there is to know. That yes, aliens do exist. That yes, they have harmed people before. That yes, they do maybe not come from outer space, but maybe here in Earth, underground is maybe where they are and where they have come from. They're, underground dwellers, I guess you could say. And they have military, their own bases underwater. These are things that David Grush has already told us. Now, we had Tucker Carlson, who did a deep dive and got a lot of information that none of us would have access to, who took it a little bit further. You can go out and you watch all the Tucker Carlson interviews I have, where he talks about, aliens. It's quite disturbing, actually. And he said he got to the point where he didn't want to learn anymore. He just said, enough. It's scary. It's too scary. He said some of the things he learned were so disturbing, he never told his wife. And, I think some of those disturbing things, and I've never talked about this on the show before, but some of those disturbing things I've heard are that, we have a lot of missing people, in the world. And there are some stories, whether they're true, it's classified information, I don't know, where that there are times when they do kidnap humans, not the kinds of abductions where they take you out of your bed. They go up and experiment a little bit with you, give you a tour of their spaceship, and then put you back in your bed or in a forest or, some of the different abduction theories. And I do think that some of those abductions are actually real. You call me crazy if you want. People will anyway, but I do think some of those abduction stories are real. But there's also stories where people have allegedly military, I'm trying to put this in the best way I can, where military have come across, because there are allegedly elite forces of military who deal with extraterrestrials, people we know nothing about, something like the Men in Black, but they're more like combat, and they do interact with these extraterrestrials. And I have heard, and you probably have heard this too, some of you, that they have come into contact with these extraterrestrials underground, very far underground. And when they have come into contact with them, they have come across what they called like a secret lab, where they have taken humans and they have studied humans and tortured humans, and they have used humans to feed on and feed their children. And it's pretty crazy when you think about it. And I don't know that any of that's true, and I'm not saying it's true, but I could see that being a very deep, dark thing. We know that Tucker Carlson talked about, and he's not the only one that talked about it. David Grush has talked about it. A couple other people talked about it. I played videos of them talking about it, where they say we're really just human. We're just containers, human containers. But then people will say, well, containers of what? And nobody really knows. That allegedly the extraterrestrials told them that we're just containers. That's how they view us, as containers, or like Tucker Carlson said, ants in an ant farm. They see us as ants in an ant farm. I don't really know what the truth is, because all we can do is guess. That's all we can do is guess. And I don't know, though, if Donald Trump came up on the stage and just kept it basic and said, hey, it's true, extraterrestrial lives do exist, aliens are real, whatever he might say what Obama said, just to keep it even, and say, oh, we don't have any, they're not, well, I take that back. Obama never said we don't have any. He said we don't have any at Area 51. That's what he said. Think about that. He didn't say we don't have any. He said we don't have any at Area 51. But I think there's enough disclosure already out there to tell us what we already want and know. And if you're one of those people and you're waiting and you don't believe that extraterrestrial life exists, aliens, demons, angels, whatever you may refer to them as, if you don't think they exist and you're waiting for Donald Trump to get up on a stage and tell you that something else does exist, you're probably going to be a little freaked out when you find out. Do yourself a favor. It's Friday. You got time today on a Friday. Man, I wish if I had the time, I would play the entire David Grush interview on this show and break it down piece by piece. And maybe sometime we'll do that on a weekend. But the David Grush interview, I think it's like an hour, maybe an hour and a half. You can find it on YouTube. Grush, I believe it is, David Grush. Look at his information. He was part of one of these elite folks that worked directly with extraterrestrials and within that department. And so therefore he has a lot of that information. And he will tell you pretty much everything there is to know, except for the really dark, deep stuff that we probably don't want to know and shouldn't know anyway, because you may never sleep again at night, But the way I feel, if Donald Trump gets on the stage and discloses everything, if he declassifies some of those files, it makes zero difference to me. My life is not going to change one tiny, tiny little bit, because I already believe all of these things exist. I really do. And I, like I said, call me crazy if you want. It doesn't matter to me, but I don't think we can deny it. Here we have people who are very high up in our military who talk about it, and they tell us everything that there pretty much is to know, except for the deep, dark, crazy stuff. And they don't usually get too far into the religion, although I have heard religion is a big part of it, but they don't ever talk about that, because what would happen if they came out and made an announcement that these are angels and demons? Or what if they made an announcement that religion isn't real? I don't know what direction it would go, just because I don't know what the files say. It could go in any different direction. We would have absolute chaos and pandemonium, so either direction, whether they said either way, it would be very bad. So they're probably never going to talk about that. But I don't feel like we have to wait for Donald Trump to declassify any of these files. But I will be very interested in seeing, and Donald Trump, once he says, let's declassify these files, he's going to put that into motion. I can guarantee you right now, he's already got a team on these files. And I've got a little video. I hope this is, me and my videos, I hope this is the right video. And I thought this was kind of interesting, because it's a couple of guys showing what could be I guess they used to call them UFOs. Now they're called UAPs. And I thought this was kind of an interesting video, because it shows a view that we don't normally see. I see a lot of alien type videos, UFO videos from the ground, people taking video from above. But this actually came from, I believe he probably says it in here, I think this came from the space station. I think this is a video from the space station. So let me play this here for you. I hope this is the right one. It might not be. I may not have saved the right one.
Are aliens real?
They're real,
No, not the right
but
one.
I haven't seen.
Darn it. All right. Well, I guess we'll save that for another day. I had it loaded, but that's just Obama talking about it here. We'll play him again anyway.
And they're not being kept in what is it?
Area 51.
Area 51. There's no underground facility, unless there's this enormous conspiracy, and they hid it from the President of the United States.
What was the first
All right.
question?
We had already played that. We just played it again. Darn it, I hate it. I didn't save that video. You know me and my videos, but I'll put it on social media later on Facebook. But there is a video of it came from the space station where you can see this anomaly from above, and you can see this light come up from like somewhere in the Midwest. It looks like it kind of pops up into the atmosphere, and then all of a sudden you see it as very big and very bright. They said it would probably be about the size of the space station, itself, based on the size. But you can see very clearly that it's above Earth, that it comes up above Earth, and it's just under that. I can't remember if they called that the magnetosphere, but it's right under there, the big glowing shell that goes across Earth, just underneath there. Well, it comes up and it flies over to this one area, and there's a couple flashes. And this is what's so weird about the video, is there's a couple flashes and nobody really knows, what those flashes were. In the video, they kind of say, well, maybe we, the United States, have some type of defense system, and we were actually, shooting at these things. And then all of a sudden, there's one like further over by the East Coast. There's one in the Midwest, and then there's one over further by the East Coast. And all of a sudden, whatever those two flashes were, all of them went flying. And when they went flying, you could see them break through that magnetosphere area and fly off into outer space. And this is video that came from, I believe it was from the space station. I'm going to post that when the show's over. I'm going to go find that video and post it. But either way, we'll see what Trump declassifies. I think he's going to work on that right away. I don't think we're going to get any answers, but your answers are in the David Grush interviews and in the UAP hearings and some other folks who go out and talk about these things who are in the know. So many whistleblowers out there, you don't have to rely on the files that Donald Trump declassified. It's already out there. Probably not the worst of the worst, but Trump's not going to declassify that crazy stuff anyway. All right. So for those of you who are tired of and don't care about the Nancy Guthrie case, I understand if you have to tune out. I do want to talk about the case a little. And before I do, what I want to explain, because people are saying, why do you keep talking about it? Why do you keep posting about it? If you don't look at your news feed and you just go to my page, let's say you go to my Facebook page, you will see that I am posting about everything under the sun. Literally, I make a lot of posts because I try to keep people informed. I post about Epstein, I post about Trump, I post about schools, I post about ICE, I post about Iran. I have a bazillion posts. I don't even know how many posts people probably think I do nothing but sit on Facebook all day. But I'm just screenshotting headlines is mainly what I'm doing, and putting them up sometimes with comments and sometimes not, because I just want everybody to see, what's going on. And I am always wanting to know what's going on. So if you go to my actual page and look, I'm not just posting about the Guthrie case. I'm posting about all kinds of stuff. The problem is that social media has algorithms, and they push all the posts to the bottom, and then they push the posts that they think the public has the most interest in to the top. And so what happens is you're looking through your news feed, and the algorithm is going to say, okay, well, Tabitha posted, 10 posts in the past hour, which is sometimes the case, sadly. And only one of those posts is hitting high in our algorithms as being of public interest, which is going to be the Nancy Guthrie post. So it's going to throw that in your news feed. The rest of my stuff you're probably not going to see unless you actually come to my page. And so that's the case for me. It's probably the case with a lot of other people. I post a lot about a lot of missing people, and I post a lot about a lot of different cases. It just happens to be that the algorithms pick up what they think has the best public interest, and that's what they throw in the news feed. So that's why you're seeing Nancy Guthrie all over the news feed, is just for that reason. Now, the second reason, and I think a lot of the reason why so many people do have a public interest in this case, is because it's not your normal case. There's a lot of different cases out there, a lot of them actually going on right now. Some friends of mine, I've got a couple of friends that are FBI agents, police officers, we kind of text back and forth. I think I've said this on the show before. So anytime there's a case, that's made the news, it's the nationwide news or so on, somebody will throw it into this text line and they'll say, okay, what do you think? And most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, the husband did it. It was a suicide. It was this or this. There was different things we'll say that we think it was. And 90% of the time, we're also correct in our assessment of what we think that case is. But the Nancy Guthrie case is something completely different. The people that are in my group are as stumped as everybody else because nothing makes sense in this case. It's like having this big puzzle in front of you. And if you solve this puzzle at the end of the line, you save a life, because a lot of people do. I don't. But a lot of people think that Nancy is still alive. I don't personally think that. I don't think she was alive, quite honestly, past that night. But there's a lot of people who do. And it is interesting because here we have somebody who, in my opinion, took the life of an 84-year-old grandma, and not too different from some of the other cases, of course, I've talked about that didn't get that media attention. And investigators are saying she's still alive. And then you think, okay, I think she's gone. I think a murderer out there, perpetrated this crime. The investigators seem to think she's still alive, and there's kidnappers. So, we've got two different routes of ways things can go. But either way, you get to the end of the puzzle and you put all those pieces in the puzzle. You either come up with a suspect, the person who committed a homicide, or you come up with a person who's holding Nancy alive. So one way or the other. And I think that has a lot to do with the public interest, is that it's such a weird case. Everybody, it's like playing the Clue or a whodunit. It's like, okay, we've got this piece, then today 3 more pieces come in, and that's 3 more pieces to the puzzle. Now, that happens, of course, with every case, but usually the puzzle gets put together pretty darn quick. But in this case, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. And I think a lot of the weird stuff going on, I'm starting to think, is a cover-up by the Pima County Sheriff's Department. And they're running this investigation. The FBI is involved. But the Pima County Sheriff's Department is running this investigation. And I don't know a lot about Sheriff Nanos, but I do think that he is coddling the family. And I have reason to believe this. They want to talk like Nancy is still alive, that yes, a kidnapper probably has her. I don't know of anyone, I really don't, outside of Sheriff Nanos, who actually believes that Nancy is still alive. I mean, I have all kinds of different friends that I have that are in law enforcement. None of them, I haven't even come across one yet, that believes she's still alive or that she ever survived either past that night, or a couple say maybe a couple days if somebody truly was targeting her, but the Pima County Sheriff, I think they're coddling the family because they don't want to put out a statement that they think that she's no longer with us. That's my opinion anyway. And I think they're also coddling the family because they don't talk about polygraphs, any typical, and they don't have to. This is an investigation. They don't have to tell us anything. I've said that many times before. They owe the public nothing, not one iota of information. They owe us nothing. We already know so much about this case, far more than what we should know, which is really kind of an issue on their end, that they should have never allowed all this information to be released to the public. But then here we have other podcast hosts who I think know a lot of important people, and they're getting a lot of information. We have Ashley Banfield, who has given us some information about what could have potentially part of how the scene looked. The cameras smashed, the back door left open, that there was forced entry, that there was blood inside the home. There was a lot of different things that Ashley Banfield told us, which she swears by her source. And then we have Megyn Kelly, who just announced, I think that was yesterday, not to take your focus off the family. That she believes, this is Megyn Kelly, that Megyn Kelly, I've never watched Megyn Kelly's podcast, by the way, but that she believes that the police department is just saying, because she thinks that maybe Savannah, somebody in the family said, hey, just tell the public that we've all taken polygraphs and that we're all cleared, because he made that statement, Sheriff Nanos did, that the family, their spouses, the siblings and their spouses have all been cleared. Now, Megyn Kelly says that's not true. Her source tells her that they are not cleared and that they have not taken polygraphs. Now, I don't know if that's true or if it's not true. That's what she says. And Jay says, never been a proof of life. Exactly, Jay. There has not been a proof of life. And anyone who works with cases or in any type of law enforcement, even if you just watch movies, you don't even have to know how the inner workings are. If somebody is going to target you and they intend to kidnap you for monetary benefit, they want to keep you alive. They would have taken her medicine, or maybe some people say, well, if they took her to Mexico, you can purchase all those prescriptions there, over the counter. So I get that. That's a possibility. But very rarely, is a kidnapper, there's no cases of kidnapping Americans within the United States. I mean, that's just something that just does not happen in this day and time. Bitcoin is the most traceable of all cryptos, the most traceable. Now, I did hear that TMZ, what do they have there, like their fifth ransom note? And I did hear that it was not Bitcoin this time. They asked for something else, probably because this person is just a hoaxer, a scammer, and they're online reading stuff. And they're like, oh, yeah, I see now. I should have never asked for Bitcoin because they can trace it. And sometimes it's not easy to trace, but I know people who are investigators who used to be FBI agents who now they do nothing but trace crypto coin, and they train other people to trace crypto coin. I had actually thought about it one time, going to a couple of their classes to learn how to trace it myself, for investigative purposes. I own a security company, so that could have been an avenue I went down. I just don't have time to do that. But there are some other cryptos. There's 3 other cryptos. I know it's Monero, I think it is, and Dash and Zcash that are nearly impossible to trace. So they could have come up with something else. If they're a kidnapper, I mean, where would they be holding Nancy? I think a lot of people think, well, they took her to Mexico and somebody's mom, wife, sister, grandma is caring for her. Okay, well, you have an 84-year-old woman who's in very frail health, who doesn't have her medication, who is injured. Yes, I mean, somebody could take care of her. They could even take her, if the cartel, they certainly have a lot of power. They could have taken her to a nursing home, and said, hey, don't reveal she's here. Keep her in a back private room. So there are certainly ways in which she could be alive. But if that were true, they would have given proof of life. If Nancy were alive, this person would have given proof of life. No way around it. There's no way this is the cartel. Because if it was the cartel, they for sure would have given proof of life. This is their bread and butter. They do a lot of kidnappings within Mexico. They know how to play the game. So let's say it was just some weird bungling person, you know, somebody locally who saw Nancy Guthrie with Savannah Guthrie when they were visited her hometown. They went into a restaurant, they went back to Nancy's home. There is some evidence apparently that somebody did Google search Nancy's address and did Google search, you know, how much money Savannah makes. They did it, I think that was it July 2025, then in January 2026. I don't know if it was the same person. Hopefully, whoever it was, they can go back and track that down. But, you know, so that could have been somebody who heard Nancy lives in the neighborhood. It could have been somebody who is a fan of Savannah who saw that her mom lives in Tucson. It might have just been, I look up so much crazy stuff. If the FBI ever looked at my phone, they'd be like, gosh, you know, all the stuff you're looking at. I'd be guilty of 1,000 different things. You know, so people look up random things for different reasons. But let's just say somebody did target Nancy Guthrie. Okay. Again, what would be the purpose? If they're not holding her for ransom, they're not giving the proof of life, even if they were the most dumbest, most bungling people ever, they would still do their best to keep her alive so they could get the money. You know, so nothing, in my opinion, makes sense there. I don't think there's any evidence whatsoever that she's in Mexico. And I still think investigators believe she's in the vicinity of her home. If you think about it, you got to read between the lines. You can't even pay attention to what investigators are saying. You have to look at their actions, a lot like in life, right? You always say, don't listen to people's words, look at their actions. That's the same when it comes to investigations. Don't listen to the words, look at the actions. And you will see what the actions are, that they continue to search around Nancy's home. They've been back and forth to Nancy's home many, many times. They've been to Annie's home many, many times. They've been within a 2-mile circle around Nancy's home consistently. Outside of that one lead they had in Mexico, which did not pan out, by the way, they have stayed close to Nancy's home. They think that whatever happened to Nancy is within that 2-mile range. And I know that really centers it in, doesn't it? That 2-mile range. And I still feel like they're going down a path that it's somebody she knows, because we know that the SUV they pulled over, the Range Rover, that belonged, and it does appear to be true, that was Nancy's her niece by marriage, something along those lines. Her husband's sister's daughter, I believe is how it worked, and is married to or with the guy that drove that Range Rover. But I'm pretty sure they haven't said the word cleared. But at the same time, I have heard that they're really not looking at him that heavily anymore. You know, they went into that wholeheartedly, probably got a lead. I'm not sure where they got the lead, maybe from Kayla, the niece herself. I don't know. But they've seemed since then to kind of be lost. You know, they're circling around. You can see the planes, you can see the helicopters. People post the charts constantly, but they're staying in that same little range around Nancy's house. You know, the only new thing that I saw when it came to videos, let's see. Pete says there's no way an 84-year-old woman with health issues is still I agree, Pete. I completely agree. Karen says, did they take anything from the house? You know, Karen, that's a good question. And we don't know. We just don't know. And they have bungled this investigation from day one, in my opinion. Now, that's just my opinion. But think about this. I think Nancy very likely had a safe. You know, it's possible this was a burglary. Maybe the person knew she had a safe. We don't know. And we don't know if anything was taken. You know, what we do know is that when investigators initially arrived, when Nancy's daughter called and said, you know, hey, my mom didn't show up to meet her friends for this church service. We came to her house. You know, I don't even know if they saw at that time blood on the porch. I'm assuming they did. She's not here. You know, we're worried that she's wandered off, whatever they might have said. I don't even know. So the investigators come out. They immediately say, this looks like it could be a homicide. They immediately call homicide in, and they immediately call the FBI in. So in the first hour, think about that. The very first hour that this all went down, the sheriff's department saw enough evidence at the home to call in homicide and the FBI. There was something they saw in that home. You know, maybe the blood evidence, maybe something else. We don't know. And they're not certainly under no obligation to tell us. Now, I have not heard of anything missing from the home, but that's something they probably wouldn't release to the public. And the reason why is because at some point when they do find a suspect, they need that suspect to be able to tell them, what did you take from the home? And if that information is already out in the public, then they're not going to have that smoking gun information there. Now, if they get a guy, and also there's a lot of people who crazily enough, confess to crimes they didn't commit, which is crazy, but they do. And so this way investigators can say, okay, Joe, you say you committed this crime. What did you take from the home? And Joe might say, oh, I took Nancy's socks, and believe it or not, that is something people take sometimes. And the investigators will be like, no, Nancy didn't have any missing socks. What did you take? And the person doesn't know. They're like, okay, it's not you. Or they get the suspect that comes in. They'll say, okay, what did you have? What did you take? And they get the confession. They're working it down, and they try to find out, did this person have this item? Did they pawn it? Do they still have it? Did they sell it to anyone they know? They're going to try to track it down and prove that that person had that item. And of course, that could, to some degree, be their smoking gun, or they might find somebody who bought it secondhand, whatever it might be. Now, we don't know if they took anything, and it's possible they didn't know when that initial situation occurred. They might have come into the house and said, oh, everything looks perfectly in order. It doesn't look like any drawers have been opened. The safe looks closed. Everything's perfectly fine. And we know there was a locksmith there that did specialize in opening safes just a couple days ago. So that could be something. Now, usually what happens is the family comes in, the family looks through everything. They usually know, hey, my mom had a brooch. She had a diamond necklace, a diamond bracelet. She's got a safe that's got XXX in it. And this is all the things she has. And then when the family starts looking through things, they're like, oh, yeah, her diamond bracelet's missing, or whatever it might be. Or, it looks like the safe has been tampered with. Sometimes the family knows the code to the safe. Sometimes they don't. It could be, very well could be, that somebody was trying to rob Nancy, and they took her over to the safe and they said, hey, open the safe. Maybe she couldn't do it. Maybe she didn't remember the code off the top of her head. Maybe she just didn't want to do it. And they beat her with something, and that's why she was bleeding. We just don't know. We don't know what was inside that house. We don't know what they saw. No information. And they didn't secure the scene. So I don't know how much of that evidence they'll necessarily be able to use anyway. So we've got that. We don't know. We just don't know. Was it a burglary? Was it not a burglary? To me, everything lines up with it being a burglary. I've been looking at the crime data for that area. As a matter of fact, I posted it on my Facebook page earlier. There's a lot of crime in that area. In 2025, there were, I think it was 96,000 crimes that took place in the Tucson area. And a lot of those crimes, were within 1 mile to 2 miles of Nancy's house. A lot of crime, very high crime area. There's a lot of homicides in that area. Then I did another search from the Pima County Sheriff's Department of the past 2 months. And the area around Nancy's house in that Catalina foothills, there's a lot of crime in her neighborhood. I mean, not an overabundance. Her neighborhood definitely seems safer than some of the other neighborhoods, but there's a lot of incidents of larceny, which is theft, somebody coming in. And then there's also some non-forced entries, burglaries, or forced entry burglary. And those are fairly close to her house. And what's interesting about one of the instances I came across is they were all committed on the same day. So just recently on February 15th, there were several reports of larceny that took place, different types of theft on properties very close to Nancy's home. And so therefore, it's very easy to believe that there's 2,300 homeless people. And it's not necessarily the homeless people committing all the crimes, but there are 2,300 homeless people in Tucson. And these people have camps set up all over the place. They all have backpacks because the outreach programs give them backpacks. They have these backpack giveaways. So they all have one or more backpacks. And what's even interesting is that there was a homeless encampment, and they called it the 100-acre bike park. Some people locally refer to it as the acres or 100-acre, camp. There's a lot of different names they call it, but it's technically called the 100-acre bike park. And I'm guessing it used to be a bike park that was later taken over by the homeless. And I've heard that there could have been upwards of 200 homeless people living in that camp, which isn't too far from Nancy's house. But now a couple months ago, I think it was exactly maybe 3 months ago, the city said, okay, we're going to tear down the homeless camp. So they leveled the homeless camp, people's tents, their belongings, everything they had just gone, towed away. I've seen countless interviews with homeless people saying, I don't have anywhere to go. All of my stuff was at this camp. I have nowhere to go. Now, there's a reporter. If you guys are following this case, you've probably seen a guy on the ground. His name is JLR. I can't remember is it John Lee Riches? I can't remember his actual name, Jesse Riches, I don't know. But it's JLR Investigates. If you ever want to follow him, it's JLR Investigates. And, I think he's doing a good job. He's got, some people say, well, he's got a shady background. I don't care about that. He seems like he's doing a good job. What he's been doing, and he had the video of it yesterday, where he went out to some of these different areas and found homeless camps. He started at Nancy's house and went out in these different points. And guess what he came across? Homeless camps, every direction you turn. So close to Nancy's house. And that some of these homeless camps, you could very easily walk between that camp and Nancy's house with no problem at all. No one would ever even see you. There's so much brush and cactuses and all these different things. You could easily traverse between those homes and the homeless camp with no one ever seeing you. That's a possibility. We have a lot more homeless people looking at these different camps in different areas because where they were all living, their community is gone. So that's a couple hundred homeless people who now all of a sudden have to find a new place to camp. And sometimes they do that right on the edge of residential areas, or in an area like this. It's so, it's just so secluded that you could set up a camp or camp anywhere and people probably wouldn't even know you were there. And, you have a lot of residents who do not go out onto their properties. It's cactuses and other bush and wildlife, things you don't want to tangle with. Another neighbor said that, somebody had interviewed a neighbor and said, what's it like here, at night when you go outside? And they're like, we don't go out at night. There's too much wildlife. We don't know what we're going to run into. They park their car and they go in the house, they come out and go back in their car. Some of them have, cordoned off backyards where they probably feel relatively safe, from the wildlife. But people generally, these are areas they just don't go out like some of us do in the Midwest and hang out in their yard. So, somebody could be camped behind the first cactus tree to the right, and maybe they wouldn't even know they were there. And a lot of these people, strangely enough, don't have cameras, which I think is really odd. And that gives an unfortunate sense of peace. People have told me, I didn't see the interview personally, but somebody told me they saw an interview with people in Nancy's neighborhood. And they said, you know what, we're not worried. There's no crime here. We don't even lock our doors at night. And that's probably why, when I was looking at the crime map around Nancy's home, there were a couple of burglaries that said that they were not forced entry. So it's probably maybe a situation where they had left their doors unlocked and somebody was able to just come in and, and take what they want. And in Nancy's house now, according to Ashley Banfield, there was forced entry. The back door, which I believe is the back door, probably underneath the awning in the back of Nancy's house. Somebody could have easily walked up through the brush and came right up to her back door, and no one had ever seen them or caught them on camera, outside of Nancy's own camera. So we just don't know. But to me, it makes perfect sense that this is somebody that's homeless in the area, that has that backpack, that's running around, robbing people. Like I said, on February 15th, there were several incidents nearby to Nancy's house where it looked like one person probably went out and committed all these thefts, like on these few streets in just one day. So, I mean, who knows? It could have been the same situation that night. We just don't know. But then you think, well, if it's a homeless person, again, not to be down on the homeless, but if it is, let's say, a homeless person or a burglary by whoever, and they show up at her house, well, why would they take her from the house? Even if she was injured, they would just leave her, right? There'd be no reason, for them to take her. None of that makes any sense. And if they did take her, where would they take her? I'm going to show you a clip in a second where they could potentially have a suspect vehicle. But of course, in any investigation, there could be several suspect vehicles until they rule a vehicle out. They could say, okay, well, I saw this vehicle at a gas station at the right time. I just want to talk to these people. They list it as a suspect vehicle until they can talk to these people. So we're going to talk about that. But everything I have seen, to me, investigators are looking for somebody who is on foot. Makes no sense in the world. I understand. Why would somebody be on foot? And if they were on foot, how did they take Nancy out of the house? I don't know. That's the question of the day. Let's see. I'm going to play this quick video clip here for you about the car.
I can tell you that somebody copy and attempt to locate for a vehicle of interest in the Nancy Guthrie case, last seen the area of Ina Road in Thornydale, unknown direction of travel. Just 9 units, somebody copy and attempt to locate for a vehicle of interest in the Nancy Guthrie case, last seen the area of Ina Road in Thornydale Road, unknown direction of travel. going to be a dark blue 2019 Chevy Malibu, Arizona, Mary, Adam, Lincoln, Ida, Boy, William, Union, William.
So they're looking for a dark blue Chevy Malibu, year 2019. I don't know if they found it. I don't know whatever happened with it. We certainly have never heard anything about it. But I'm sure investigators think the same thing, that, gee, it looks like this is probably somebody from the neighborhood, potentially a burglar. They've got their backpack. They could be taking things out of Nancy's house. But why did they take her out if they're on foot, which it appears they were looking for somebody on foot? How did they get away? Did they call somebody and say, hey, bring your vehicle over? I've got to take this lady out of the house. We don't know. That's just where that's where all theories stop. And so I've done a lot of research on homeless in the area, and a lot of these homeless people are easily identifiable. And I've seen a lot of video going around where people post, okay, they've got surveillance video from their, Nest cameras, Ring doorbell cameras of somebody walking around with a backpack in their vehicle or, in their garage, in their shed. I've got one video where somebody had stolen somebody's fire pits. Now, one thing I've seen consistent is I have seen the same guy in at least 3 different videos. I mean, it's very clear it's the same guy. There's something, I'm not going to tell what, because I don't know if anybody hunt this guy down, but he's got something very distinctive. Now, I don't think that's the guy that did this to Nancy. I really don't. Investigators are aware of this guy. They know he's the one that's been seen in a couple videos, and if they thought it was him, they would have went and picked him up already. So there's a lot investigators know, and there's a lot that obviously they're not going to tell us. So we're just going to have to wait and see. The last thing I wanted to add, as you guys know, I have some lung issues. I'm having a hard time breathing, so I'm not going to be able to say too much more. Jay says, has to be vehicle, no blood evidence, supporters, anything beyond the front of the house. Yeah, the blood trail goes from the front door on the porch. But, it almost to me, whenever I look at the blood evidence, it goes from the front door on the porch, down the sidewalk area, the little pathway. And then they can't tell if it went on in the driveway or not, because apparently the type of driveway she has and the gravel, so many people had driven over at this point, they don't know if the blood drops continued or not. They couldn't tell because the gravel had moved so much, and it's a dark gravel, and they said they just couldn't tell. So we don't know if it stopped at the pathway, if they got into a vehicle, if they went further than that. I would think they would have had to have gotten in a vehicle. I mean, where are you going to take somebody who can't really walk, but believe it or not, I know this sounds crazy, and I'm going to go down this weird rabbit hole for a minute. Homeless people actually have wheelchairs. Now, I don't think this person did, but I just watched a video last night of they went to a homeless camp, and these homeless people had wheelchairs. And what they did is they would take these wheelchairs to these burglaries, and they would put all the stuff in the wheelchair. They would go to a house, and they would have their backpack. They would have you can go and look at the videos. If you follow this guy, his name's Righteous Monkey. He's actually out searching for Nancy, by the way, in these various homeless camps, and he does outreach for homeless people in the area. And this guy knows what he's doing. He's been out searching around the river. He's been searching in the brush. He's been searching out in these homeless camps. But he was showing one of these homeless camps where they had a couple of wheelchairs. And they would take these wheelchairs to, let's say, burglarize a home or a business. And all of the loot that they got, they would put in that wheelchair. And that's how they got it. They used the wheelchair for transport. That's how they would get stuff back and forth to the homeless camp. So I can't totally rule out that somebody didn't come on foot and have some way to get Nancy back to wherever they wanted to do. But it just doesn't make any sense that they would do that. I'm not saying they can't do it. It just makes no sense that they would. And yeah, we don't know. I mean, they took Nancy's car. We don't know why they took Nancy's car. We just have no idea. But one thing I do want to add before we head out, I'm kind of at the capacity of talking for this morning, and I got to get to work. But one thing that I want to add is, the reward has risen to $200,000. Technically $202,000, $202,500. But here's what's interesting is that the FBI put in the first $100,000. I don't know who gave the $2,500. I'm guessing that was the family. I don't know who else that would be. And then there's a private donor who runs the Milwaukee Crime Stoppers, and I think his last name was Hubie, if I can remember that correctly. I did make a post about it. He gave $100,000. So the reward now is $200,000. But why is this not being posted? And I am kind of wondering why the family didn't donate more also. If you have, somebody like Savannah who has millions of dollars and they want information, why doesn't she say, hey, I'm going to kick it up to $500,000? You know, we've got 100,000 from the FBI, 100,000 from Crime Stoppers. I'm going to throw in another $300,000 for information that leads to my mother. I'm kind of baffled by that. And I'm not saying they're bad people or they did this for any bad reasons. There must be something strategic behind why they've not increased the reward. Maybe they don't want to reward people who do terrible things, thinking that they'll, you know, have other people that commit these types of crimes. I don't know. I really don't know, but it does kind of baffle me that they haven't raised the reward. It also baffles me that they're not talking about the reward, you know, because I think if a lot more people knew, hey, the reward, $200,000, you know, I can guarantee you there's a group of people out there, not just one person, there is a group of people out there who know what happened to Nancy. And if they're so interested in money, then you would think that somebody, you know, would say, hey, I'll take that $200,000. Give me immunity. I'll come in. I'll give you a tip. Or even they'll do it anonymously. They get the money. Sometimes they're not allowed to give tips anonymously. But one way or the other, they can find a way to turn that information in to get that tip money. But that's not happening. So maybe they need to talk about the tip money a little bit more. And Mike says the Supreme Court just struck down Trump's tariffs. Of course they did, Mike. They don't want our country to be wealthy or make money. And Lisa says, so no refunds to we the people. Lisa, sadly, I don't think we were going to get any refunds anyway. Colonel Joe Adams, the FBI, is notorious for not paying the rewards. Yeah, well, yes, especially ransoms. I don't know about regular rewards. But you know, if the family offered a reward, they would be able to pay it. You know, I would think outside of the FBI. And Colonel Adams, I thought about you the other day because there was a guy that showed up at Nancy's house who is a combat search and rescue veteran. And he came, I thought he was from originally California. I guess he's relocated to the area. And I did post about him on social media. And he said, hey, I'm here. I'm going to lend my expertise to help find Nancy. They wouldn't even let him look around her property. He showed them his credentials, or like, nope, sorry, you can't look around here. So the guy's been out and he's been looking and doing what he can. But he also believes that Nancy is nearby within that very small circle. So, you know, that seems to be the common thought, is that she's right there, very near to her home, you know, and you know, I know this sounds another crazy route. I've been thinking of all these different theories. In a way, I kind of wonder, probably not, but you know, what if it was an instance where she was robbed, it was a robbery, and she did get injured. But while this person was, you know, ransacking her house or trying to get in her safe or whatever they might have been doing, you know, here she is, she's injured, she's disoriented. What if she did just walk away? I mean, I know there's nothing that supports the theory that she did, but what if she knew she was in danger and she walked away from her home and she somehow managed, without her walking device, to find a place to hide? But she found a place that was so easy to hide, so well, you know, hidden that they've not been able to find her. I can't imagine that's the case. I know that I've had that pacemaker sniffer out there, but that is the theory, quite honestly, that makes the most sense to me, is that it was a burglary. She did get injured and she fled the home. You know, that's only theory in my head that makes sense. But then I would think, well, they would have found her by now if that would have been the case, you know. And then, of course, a family member being involved is the second theory that makes the most sense to me. Kidnapping, totally off the table. Totally off the table. And let's see here. And Josh says, good morning, Patriots. God bless the United States of America. Good morning, Josh. Jay says, what's Trump used? Even he said he might not hold up in court, but he could use a different law for his tariffs. Jay, Trump will absolutely figure out a way to do those tariffs. I can guarantee you that. Jay says, only a Democrat would hate to see America do well and file a lawsuit. Isn't that true? The tariffs, I was a little skeptical of the tariffs at first, but the tariffs, I think, are doing us good, and they are bringing money into the country, and we're getting out of debt very quickly, which is so incredibly important. All right, guys, well, that's all I have to add today. Anything else that comes up, and I'm sure there will be more on the Nancy Guthrie case, I will certainly be talking about on social media, as well as everything else. There's so much going on. I am off work this weekend, so I was supposed to work, now I'm going to be off work. So I'm going to be probably posting a lot. I'll be keeping up with a lot of stuff. If there's anything new coming on, you know I'll be posting it. You know how I am. I just cannot help myself. But either way, I've got to run. I got to get to work, and I'm also going to be out of breath. So all those things all at once. But we'll see where things turn out. We'll see. Investigators, like I said, they're not looking in the Nancy case. They're not looking at the homeless people like I am. They're looking at other individuals. They're still looking at this as a targeted kidnapping. So we'll see how far they get down that line and if anything changes. But that's it for me today. I hope you guys have a really good weekend. Happy Friday once again. I am Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. Thanks for joining me, everyone. And again, have a fantastic day.